Welcome, my name is Nayaswami Devarshi. We have a weekly reading from Swami Kriyanandaji's book, Living Wisely, Living Well. Today's reading, March 21. Criticize no one. If you must offer correction, give that person a way to preserve his self-respect. When others feel your support, they will support you in turn, perhaps at times when you need it most. Before I get into our topic, I would just like to say, if you have any questions on this subject of criticism, criticizing others, judging others, self-criticism, feel free to type your question in. You can do that on your interface there with the webinar, and I'll try to get a way to answer them during our webinar. So as questions come up, feel free to type them in anytime during this next 30 minutes. Criticize no one. Now, Swami Kriyanandaji is talking about the negative type of criticism that people tend to get into, I think everyone to varying degrees. And then he advises at times that it is essential to offer guidance and correction to someone. If you're in a role of leadership, whether that's in a company, as a parent, as a manager, whatever it is, there are times when we must offer correction. And so Swamiji is advising, do it in a way that preserves the person's self-respect. I'm in this role at times in directing and guiding and helping people. And one thing that I have found that's really helpful is that if you win people's trust and respect and love by respecting and loving them, then there's an openness more easily where they are more open to receiving correction without getting defensive, without reacting, without just automatically defending themselves. Because at that point, the person trusts you, they respect you, they know, especially, that you love them and are just wanting to help them. And so there is much more of an openness there. Sometimes there are people who will get defensive no matter what. So don't blame yourself if a person reacts defensively and negatively to some guidance, and try to not see it as criticism. Criticism, I guess you could say, is simply finding fault and pointing it out to someone. Rather, try to see, when you're in this role of guiding others, see it as a way of trying to help them lovingly, carefully, because unasked for advice is not always well received. And so there has to be a relationship with the person if it's to be received in the right way. But again, if you develop this connection with someone through trusting them, loving them, respecting them, then I have found that even certain people you can be fairly blunt with, because they know that you really do have their best interests in mind. I've also found that when giving guidance like that, sometimes it's just very helpful and wise to not say it with a negative feeling or emotion and wait till any emotions die down and offer the advice even with some humor, because good friends with each other, they know they can trust each other and they can laugh about these things. And I have found that if there is again, a close relationship of trust, respect, and friendship, that you can be very open and the person will receive it in the way that it's given in that context, which is as a friend, just wanting to help another friend. So I would also say that in those cases, try to find a way to help the person with the guidance that you're giving, rather than just pointing a finger and saying you're doing this and blaming them. Try to see it as, and maybe even offer a suggestion about how something could have been done better, as a way of just pointing in the right direction, rather than just finding fault. So the other side of this is sometimes you're in an irritable mood, you're tired, and the mind gets negative or critical. And just be very careful of this, because negativity and criticism can spiral and create a momentum that's very difficult to get out of. And so just watch yourself in this way. Swami Kriyanandaji recommends going on a criticism fast if you find yourself being critical. And just watch yourself. If you find yourself just criticizing others for no reason, except because of you don't like what they do or you're blaming them for something, just catch yourself. And one thing that I have found helpful is to work on your own qualities, faults, as the case may be, and just point the finger the other way. Point the finger in your own direction to be working on whatever you need to work on, not in an overly critical and putting yourself down kind of way, but just as a way of always improving yourself. A friend of mine, a very wise friend at Ananda Village, said that one day she was listening to a satsang given by one of the Ananda Acharyas, and she caught herself doing something that she realized that she must have done many times in her life. And she, at that moment, made a vow, I'm never going to do this again. And what she did was something that I think all of us do sometimes. We hear someone giving a satsang or a discourse, and we think, if only this person could hear that right now. And it's usually someone who we're kind of irritated with, or someone we're very close to. Maybe it's a husband or a wife, or someone we're having a tussle with at that time. So if you ever catch yourself thinking that way, if only this person could hear that advice, try to break yourself of that habit, because it really is not a helpful way to think. And the way my friend puts it, ever since then, whenever she hears a discourse and she hears advice, she always and only applies it to herself. Not in a negative or putting down herself way, but just, what can I learn from this that I'm hearing? And so you will find that great spiritual growth comes when you can apply these things to yourself. When you read scriptures, when you read spiritual books that offer advice, always introspect and ask yourself, how can I grow by applying this to myself? Now, there's also just a dynamic that happens in groups. And this dynamic is that sometimes there's one person who's very negative, or a couple of people who are very negative and create a negative energy. And there's different ways that you can work with this. Very often you will find, and I've seen this even recently in my own life, that fighting negativity with negativity or criticism, or directly meeting it head on and fighting it, in a way that just creates more tension, strife, negativity. And very often that's exactly what the person is wanting. They're wanting a fight. I was one time, many years ago, I was parked in front of a store waiting for someone. And just right outside the car, I was driving my car and I was parked. Right outside my car window, these two men started shouting at each other, screaming at each other. They were just about to come to blows and start punching each other. And I thought that I would be the peacemaker. In the Bible, the Beatitudes, Christ said, "Blessed is the peacemaker." And so I stepped out of the car and started to intervene and say, "Come on, you guys, let's just calm down." And what happened was, it was very funny, actually. And they were fighting over a parking space. And this one guy was really upset over the other guy. And I started trying to intervene and get them to calm down and this and that. And pretty soon, they were about to fight me because they were really upset that I was meddling in their business. And I realized they wanted to fight each other. There was nothing that was going to stop them from fighting each other. They were just looking for a fight. And that's what they wanted at that moment. So I walked away, and I think at some point I realized that maybe my intervention did make the two of them introspect and realize how stupid it was to come to blows over a parking place. But you'll see that sometimes people who are negative and express that negativity, they're just wanting a fight because they're wanting to get entangled, and they're also very often, it's their way of trying to drag you down into their negative state of mind. There's an expression which is that don't wrestle with pigs in the mud, because pigs love wrestling in the mud and they want to drag you into the mud with them and wrestle, and they enjoy that. And in a way you're fighting that battle on their own turf, their home territory. And so very often the way to fight negativity is not with judgment, criticism, is to put out a lot of positive energy. And I've seen this with group dynamics. And it's something that I saw, especially in the early years of Ananda Village. And Swami Kriyanandaji has talked about this. Because in the early years of Ananda, which is this worldwide spiritual movement now, but it started in one place in California. Swami Kriyananda's first ashram started in the late 1960s. When I moved there in 1977, it was still in its formative years. And sometimes there would be people, or small groups of people, who would get negative about the way things were run and the way things were done. But over time I saw that the answer was to put out a lot of positive energy. Because what happened was, and I saw this many times, people who would start putting out a lot of positive energy create a very strong positive magnetism. And those who were sitting on the fence and being influenced one way or the other, when there is strong positive energy, it's much, much more attractive and much more magnetic than negative energy. And I saw that whenever there was a small group of negative people or a negative person, and there wasn't anything to engage them with their negativity, they eventually just left or became positive. And so very often, best way to deal with negativity is to put out more positive energy than the person putting out the negative energy. Now, what to do when we get engaged in this? And Swami Kriyananda gives some very good advice, and I'll read it. It's fairly long. And again, if you have any questions, please type them in, and I will try to answer them. But Swamiji writes about mental criticism especially, because that's where it starts, is mental criticism. And be really watchful, because you'll find that when you can be aware that mental criticism is starting to happen, and that it's just criticism, and that it has no useful purpose, you'll find that you can stop yourself from saying very hurtful things to people that you love. And so just learn to have a bit of a pause between your thoughts, especially critical thoughts, and your speech. If there's a little bit of a pause where you can learn habitually to stop, take a deep breath, you'll find that you avoid saying very hurtful things that you wish, that you regret later from saying. And the way Swami talks about it, but he also talks about dealing with negative people in this context. He says, learn to cut off speech at any time, not by wrath or by way of showing displeasure, but through sheer discretion. He who mistreats us often knows his wrong behavior. And here he's talking about people who speak negatively against us. But fire increases fire. And so he's saying, back off. Criticism increases wrath. Let people in ugly moods alone. Give them a chance to seclude themselves. Quarantine them. This was Master's way, Yoganandaji's way. Just leave them completely alone. If you have a hair-trigger temper, count to 10 before you speak, and then don't speak. We all have our personalities to contend with, and all our little faults. And then he talks about how Yogananda dealt with it. Many times we observed Yoganandaji's discipline in regards to moods and ugly behavior. He would leave persons in moods alone and see that others left them alone. They were isolated. It was strong discipline, but it is effective and sometimes necessary. Be sure not to respond when others in those moods try to upset you or try to get you to confess your weaknesses. Master often said, it is not necessary to confess a fault. Simply, quietly correct yourself and move on. Others will think they were mistaken about you, or they will respect you for making the correction if they are aware of it. We are all here to correct and improve ourselves. And finally he concludes, conquer wrath by calmness. Stop quarrels by silence. Stop disharmony by being sweet of speech. Discourage discourtesy by being courteous ourselves. It is still true that, quote, a soft answer turneth away wrath. So this is just the high road, as they say. Sometimes we have to speak out and speak strongly, but generally experiment with this and find if you can try to find a way, if you have a hot temper, if you get irritated, if you get angry, try to find a way to count to 10, to slow down that connection between the first critical or angry thought and your speech. Try to find a way to slow that down and just learn that positive energy, especially in a dynamic and strong way, eventually conquers negative energy. It can take some time, Again, talking about group dynamics that I have seen, that it can take a good amount of time of putting out positive energy, but you will find that people who are well-intentioned, and most people are, and I think for most of us, we are in group situations where most people are well-intentioned and wanting to do right. In those situations and in those groups, you'll find that positive energy has a great deal of magnetism. Kind words, courteous thoughts, supportive energy, loving energy eventually draws people to that side. And you'll find that those who are negative, they don't have a sounding board to bounce back their negativity, which is very often what they're wanting. And so that is really the way to overcome this. Do we have any questions that people have asked? Not yet. If people do, again, want to ask a question about this, right behavior, judgment of others, criticism, how to calm negative energy, just type it in on the screen. Now, Swami also gives some advice for March 22nd. He says, trust life, even if you cannot trust people. For human nature is unreliable, but life itself is ruled by immutable law. Right action leads always, in the end, to victory. And this is where he's touching on what I've been talking about, which is that, yes, we cannot always trust people. And so this positive approach doesn't always change everybody, but you will find that if you make this positive approach a habitual way of living, a loving, kind, giving, generous approach, a way of life, a way of acting, that this is the right action he is talking about. And human nature may be unreliable. You may not win every individual person, but life itself, as he says, is ruled by immutable law. And if you put out positive, right energy in everything that you do, it eventually will win over. Where there is dharma, there is victory. And it happens in big ways and in little ways. It doesn't just happen in wars and great ventures. But even in little ways, you'll find that those who behave dharmically with energy, because sometimes you'll see people who are kind and sweet of word, but they're passive and low energy sometimes, and that doesn't have a strong influence. So to really have a positive influence, this approach of being positive, speaking positively, changing a positive energy, this approach done with energy starts to create a very, very strong magnetism. I found an affirmation very helpful, which I've shared here before, and it's really a very, very good one. When I first came to Ananda Village, I was not used to being around a lot of people, and so I was a little bit uncomfortable. And I felt that people sort of, because I wasn't strong in myself, I felt that people's energies disrupted my own energy too much. I was just a little bit too maybe sensitive in certain ways. And I found the answer was that I had to put out more positive energy and radiating that positive energy out. And this affirmation that I did is one of Yoganandaji's, which is, I will radiate love and goodwill to others, that I may open a channel for God's love to come to all. I will radiate love and goodwill to others, that I may open a channel for God's love to come to all. And I found that by repeating this affirmation over and over again, over a long period of time, over a year, that it really created a very strong positive magnetism in myself, but also in my dealings and relationships with others. It made it positive and pleasant to be around others, because when I was around others and I was doing this affirmation, it put me into a very positive and giving state of mind. And I found that this created a very positive magnetism. So if you're dealing with a negative, critical energy in a group with a particular person, try to increase your own energy and magnetism on the positive side by doing an affirmation like this. And again, I'll say it again. I will radiate love and goodwill to others, that I may open a channel for God's love to come to all. Now, Swami Kriyananda also talks about how to respond to people who speak against us and who are critical of us and who speak negatively of us. This happens. I think it happens to everyone who is doing a good thing in their lives. The way Swamiji answered this, it's in another one of his Living Wisely, Living Well readings from this week. He says, in addressing those who have spoken against you, say to them, thank you. You've helped me affirm that which alone is real to me, the joy of my own being. And you don't have to say this out loud because I think some people will misunderstand it. But when people speak against you, they're trying to bring you down. That's really the purpose of that type of speech. That's just pure criticism and doesn't have any really positive guidance or anything. And so, again, affirm, you've helped me to affirm that which is real, that alone which is real to me, the joy in myself. And so Swamiji writes very interestingly about a, quote, friend who once spent more than 1 hour coldly denouncing me for all the faults he had perceived in me. They seemed in some way to disturb his peace of mind. I listened in silence, then thanked him. There was nothing more to be said. After his departure, however, I wrote what I think of as one of my best songs. And I'll read the lyrics to this song in a moment. But I also just wanted to talk about this person, because Swamiji also said about this person that they were always criticizing what was going on at Ananda. They were always critical, trying to correct people, situations. And when they were, when this was put to their face, that you're just always being negative and critical, they said, as a way of rationalizing their negative behavior, they said that every group needs a gadfly, someone who points out what's wrong as a way of improving the situation. And really, he was just being negative. But Swamiji pointed out that those who are always trying to correct others, a situation, in the thought of, I know what's right and I'm trying to improve it, they start to create a very negative energy within themselves. And it creates a magnetism that just is a downward spiral, as it was with this person. And Swamiji wrote a song after receiving all this really negative, pretty nasty criticism from this person. And Swamiji, the words of this song, though green summer fade and winter draw near, my Lord, in your presence, I live without fear. Through tempest, through snows, through turbulent tide, the touch of your hand is my strength and my guide. I ask for no riches that death can destroy. I crave only thee, your love and your joy. The dancers will pass, the singing must end. I welcome the darkness with you for my friend. And then Swamiji writes, for this song I am forever grateful to my self-styled enemy and ill-wisher. So that you can even be grateful when people attack you and speak against you. So do we have a question here?
Yes.
So
this is office space, lot of criticisms. So what is the best way to be not pulled into it and to act rightly?
yeah, so someone is asking a question that I've heard a number of times in India, and less often in the West, but they are in an office situation, and there's a lot of criticism and negativity. And what is the best way to deal with it? And this is just an interesting question. I think that people who face this, that this is actually a gift from God and the Guru, if you have a Guru, to help us grow. Because the best way to deal with this, I'll also first talk about the wrong way to deal with it. This question is often asked by people who have a meditation practice. They meditate in the morning, they're very peaceful and calm. They go to their office, and there's all this negative energy. And meditation opens the heart, and it tends to make us more sensitive. And if you go into this office situation, and there's negativity, the tendency is to try to protect yourself and withdraw into yourself, pull away from the negative people and just withdraw. And this is a very unmagnetic approach, because what's happening is that you're closing your heart. You're sort of just trying to protect your heart like this, but in protecting it, you're kind of hunching forward, not necessarily physically, but your heart is retracting in a way. And you can't go through life like this, just always trying to be defensive and sort of turn away from the blow of negativity or criticism. The way is, like I said earlier, to put out a very strong positive energy. It doesn't have to be with words. It can simply be to do an affirmation like the one I just suggested. I've heard people having good results with this approach. Take that affirmation that I just made or mentioned, say it strongly, positively, mentally, and in this office situation, you'll find that the best answer is to try to keep putting out a positive energy every day, even proactively. As soon as you walk into the situation, pray for that person who's negative, send them mentally blessings and energy. Do this affirmation, radiate love and goodwill to those people. You will find, and I've heard of people experiencing this, that if you have this strong, positive, loving, giving attitude towards others in a situation like that, that it may not be that you'll change those people, but you will find that they start changing when you are around. Because people do react to a stronger positive magnetism than their own negative magnetism, which negative magnetism only can go so far and only has so much power. And so the reason this is a great blessing when this happens is that it forces us to start putting out a lot more positive energy than we're used to doing. Practice this. Pray for people in your office space, and by praying for them, just mentally, quietly as you're working, if someone's getting upset, maybe just have a small smile on your face and mentally only send them light and energy, and ask, if you're a disciple of Yoganandaji, ask Yoganandaji, bless this person, send them peace, send them calmness, send them joy, transform them. You'll find that if you do this with enough consistency, persistence, energy, and magnetism, that what usually happens is it starts to change the environment. What always happens is that it really changes you. And what it does, especially in changing you, is that it increases your own positive magnetism such that you're not nearly as much affected by the negative criticism and energy going around you. So what it does is it creates sort of a force field of protection. Because again, if you just turn within yourself and try to protect yourself from negative energy, your aura gets very weak and you actually are affected more by it. But if you radiate love and goodwill to others, put out that energy in those situations, you find that it creates a very strong magnetic aura around you that protects you from the negativity. It's almost like it creates a force field around you that negativity cannot enter. And so experiment with these things. When you're faced with such situations, try to have a bit of an impersonal attitude and just say to God, to the Guru, okay, this is a puzzle that you're giving to me. How do I deal with it? And experiment with different ways of doing it. And again, if you're in that situation, do this affirmation in your office while you're sitting there in the midst of criticism and negativity. I will radiate love and goodwill to others, that I may open a channel for God's love to come to all. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti.